This is
disorderly group here.
This is quite a group.
Yes, it is.
Thank you for coming. Some of us don't know each other. I'm Andy Valinsky. I represent District 2 on the council. I'm just kind of blown away by this group. I wish I'd had access to this group before I started this job so that I would know what I was getting into. Obviously, we're all here to help celebrate the bicentennial. My colleague, Russ Prescott, and I are chairing this meeting, although any group of you could have done that. Let me quickly make an opportunity for the chair of the Bicentennial Commission to say something. And
I'm Randy Cushing, I'm a state rep, and I know many of you people, and I get to chair the Bicentennial Commission, which has been, a couple hundred years in the making at least. We have had a wonderful series of events planned for this week. One of the most important things, of course, is to celebrate and lift up the fact that we're unique among all the other states and that we have the role of a council being as part of the check and balance on our chief executive. It's your conversation. Go forward and just welcome. Thanks for coming.
maybe let's do this. As I said, I represent District 2. I happen to be from Concord. Let's first just go around and maybe say the years that you served and where you're from and what district, and then we'll come back and Russell will get us started on the conversation.
Sounds great. Russell Prescott, District 3. I have a seat that Bruce Griffin sat in, and it's a wonderful, comfortable seat. Thank you, Bruce. And I started in 2016, so this is really just my beginning of my third year, and it's a new experience, and I have enjoyed it very, very much. Ruth.
I'm Ruth Griffin. I live in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And John Henry, you know who he is. John Henry Snoodle, that is. He called me up and he said, get out of that chair and go and sign up for the Executive Council. And I said, well, I better check with Billy Cahill first. He said, never mind that. He said, everything will be all right. So I ran 10 times, 20 years. And don't ask me what years they were, but there's so many of them. But I never regretted putting my name on that ballot. And I never did anything for myself. I did it only for the people of the state of New Hampshire, which I loved all the time I served, and I still love it now. Your turn, Ray.
My turn. Isn't that funny? I feel like I've been here for almost all of that 200 years.
At least half.
We're only half that age.
But I was first elected in 2002. Thanks to Tom Colantuno, I had to run twice in 1 year. I was here for about 11 years, so five and a half terms, I guess. And it was very interesting. And actually, the council in New Hampshire is very unique. There are councils in other parts of the country. Massachusetts has one, but all they do is confirm judges. But in New Hampshire, they actually have authority. And as we can see from the people that are serving here, it's a check and balance really on the governor. And it's really a very, very interesting job, because actually you're right in the nerve center of the state when you're on the executive council. And Ruth, you were here when I got here. Were you here when I left?
I think so.
I don't know, you kind of watch them all come and go. She's the grand old dame of the executive council. And it's always been a pleasure to serve with you and the other folks that are still here.
Well, hi, I'm Dan St. Blair. I don't have the history that these two fine people beside me have. I did have the honor of serving with Ray between 2011 and 2013. I'm from District 2.
I'm Earl Rinker. I was elected the same time Ruth Griffin was in 1986, and we served from 87 to January of 96 together, and then she got 10 more years beyond that. if you're wondering what her actual terms of service was. And I guess I would make one other comment that former Governor Sununu mentioned this morning at the governor's meeting, and that was that not only are we we're the only state that has a council, not counting Mass, which doesn't get to do much, but as Bernie Streeter, a long-term, I'm surprised he's not here, a longtime councilor and former mayor of Nashua, had pointed out, there's never been a scandal in state government about any contracts or any issues or anything in the history of the state that I know of that anybody's ever mentioned. And part of it is because this council, which Governor Sununu mentioned this morning, looks at all of those state contracts and gets to talk about them and talks about them in the open. And the other Governor Sununu even mentioned how everybody from both sides of an issue, when they had the Planned Parenthood issue here, would be filling this room and could just walk in and listen and lobby their councilors and the governor and be shoulder to shoulder, elbow to elbow to him. And that's open government that you don't see in hardly any other state in the country, and a system that's worked so well for this state. I just thought I'd pass that on.
I'm Bill Cahill. I represent District 3, which is primarily the Seacoast region. Just prior to Ruth Griffin, who was also a state senator from Portsmouth. I served from 2015 to 2017 with prior Governor Sununu, John Sununu. I really enjoyed being on the council. I always think about the one person can serve in government in New Hampshire, whether it's the executive council, whether it's the legislature, whether it's the governor. It is a true citizen legislature. It's a true citizen executive. It's a small state. It's a small state government. I truly enjoyed it being on the executive council. I served 2 terms. It's one of the best things I ever did. I got very close to the folks in my district. Our District 3 was primarily Rockingham County, a little bit of Stratford County. I had a wonderful time representing the district. It was truly enjoyable time. I think too about the history of the Executive Council. If you go back and study the history, King Charles II carved out a little bit of what it was the original council. The commission was set up. It was the original towns of Portsmouth, Dover, Exeter, Hampton, and in deference to Rennie Cushing, who was in Hampton. That was the heartbeat of then the district, the original district of New Hampshire, carved off from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Bay State Colony. I always told my former colleague Ray Burton, he always said the North Country of New Hampshire is the heartbeat of New Hampshire. And I said, no, Ray, if you study your history, where I served, where I was from, the seacoast of New Hampshire was always the heartbeat of New Hampshire. Portsmouth, Dover, Exeter, Hampton. And Ray always took umbrage at that. He said, no, the North Country is the heartbeat of New Hampshire. I said, no, Ray, the seacoast of New Hampshire, if you study your history, King Charles thought the seacoast of New Hampshire, the original colonies, and we were carved out from the Bay State, the original Bay State colony. That's the origin of the original council, the original commission, territory of the state of New Hampshire. So it goes back into our original New Hampshire Constitution, which was carved out right after the Revolution, the late 1700s. So there's a great history to the Executive Council. If you study on it, I'm a history of New Hampshire history. My undergraduate degree was in U.S. history, and I spent a lot of time studying New Hampshire history. And I always thought about that when I was serving on the council, the great history of the Executive Council in the state of New Hampshire. So, but I'm very, very pleased to be here today. This is a real honor for me. The last time, since I've been in this room, not to belabor everybody, but it was really enjoyable for me to be here today. Since the last time I actually sat in this room, I've beaten cancer 3 times, and I'm now beating the side effects and the collateral damage associated with having a stroke. And been through a lot the last 5 or 6 years since I last sat in this room, but I gotta tell you, looking around this room, I see a lot of old friends. And this has really buoyed me up and got me back.
Very good.
It's really built me up today to look around this room and see a lot of old friends. And to get back to the executive council days and to walk into the State House today, think about a lot of old times. It's made me feel really, really good. To get back into this council chamber and think about all the good times I had here with a lot of good friends and a lot of good people that helped me along the way. So thank you very much, and it's really a pleasure to be here today with a lot of my old council friends.
Thank you, Bill.
Good to see you.
I'm Tom Colatuno. I served in District 4. I was living in the London area when I first got elected in 1998, re-elected in 2000, and then moved to Manchester where I still live. So it was great serving in District 4, the Manchester, the area, London area at the time. See, now there's been some redistricting, which I didn't like, by the way. I want to fix that. Because maybe I'll come back. But anyway, I resigned to become, I had a great honor to be asked by President George W. Bush to be U.S. Attorney for New Hampshire in the end of 2001. So I resigned in December and went out to that job. And so I want to elaborate, when we get past the introductions, a little bit on what Earl said about the significance of the council as a unique institution in our United States forms of government. Because I always got asked by U.S. attorneys when I went to conferences from around the country, what exactly is that? Are you like a lieutenant governor? No. But I've got some interesting things to say about that. And again, it's an honor. Thank you for the invitation. I love my 3 years here. And as I said, maybe I'll come back to
Hi, my name is Wayne Cryans, and this is my first term, so I've been here all of for less than 5 months. And it's been a wonderful experience. Because his name's been thrown out a few times, Ray Burton, I would have to say, was probably my great teacher for serving on the Executive Council, because for 16 years I served with him as a county commissioner. And Ray, as we often would say to governors, look north. So I'm not sure what part of the anatomy, so I'm not going to get in that argument, Bill. But there's 109 towns and 4 cities, so it's a good-sized district, and yet the same population. In fact, I've had several people say to me, I'd like to run for that if that seat would only change and get a little smaller. I said, it probably will change, but it'll go the other way. I said, in fact, somebody said to me one time, I can't believe there's as many people in the Yellow District, which is the district I represent, in your district, Russell. I said, there isn't the same number. Oh, there is. I said, there's probably more in Russell than there is. But it's been a great experience. And I've learned from, and I've known Ruth and several of the others around the table, Dan and Bill and Tom, Colin and Peter, especially because we were both in the county commission. So you learn a lot from people, and so it's all those that have come before us will help us, and hopefully someday I can look back and say I've helped someone who's ready to take my seat or someone else's seat at this table. Peter.
Michael, you know that you replaced a man that was born in these chambers.
Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Peter Spalding. I represented District 2, which seems to be the predominant district here today.
Easy.
I served from 82 to for about 20-something years with a short sabbatical included in there. What I'd like to mention today is something that a power that the governor and the council have, and something that happened at this table back in 1988. Were you here then?
I think so.
Yes, we both were.
At some point during that year, we received a pardon petition from a woman named Kathy Capel. Kathy was incarcerated in Connecticut, in a women's facility in Connecticut, for hiring someone to kill her husband, and applied to the governor and council for a pardon. I believe the event happened back in late 70s. Who was here when we...
She's been in jail for 10 years.
You,
She didn't know, I was, Ruth and I were.
I
She
think-
had been in- she-
And it was in the
she'd been in jail
70s.
for 10 years.
her husband, this was a time when there was no public attention to spousal abuse. It wasn't even considered a major issue or even a minor issue. Her husband ran a carnival, traveled through New Hampshire, Vermont, parts of New York, and they had tents with strippers. And he forced his wife to be a stripper in one of these tents. And from what we heard in testimony, it wasn't just that, it was battery, it was spousal abuse, it was everything that nobody really heard about in those years. Today it would be just something that law enforcement would just take care of, and the individual would go off to prison. But it got to be intolerable for this woman, and she hired somebody from Newport, paid him $10,000 to kill her husband, which he did. And he was arrested for it, went to trial, and was found not guilty. But she didn't get her $10,000 back. They then prosecuted her for what was a capital crime, murder for hire. So that was the issue that came before this council at that time. We had, I don't know how many hearings that summer, 2, 3, 4. This room was filled with not only spectators, but proponents of the pardon, as well as media from all over New England and in some cases the national networks. And it finally came to the point in late November of 1988. There were a couple of things that happened prior to our decision. One, there had been a presidential election where the Willie Horton TV advertisements were quite prominent about revolving door of prisoners being incarcerated and then released, committing a crime, sent back in. And President-elect George Herbert Walker Bush had just announced that Governor John Sununu was going to be his chief of staff. And so it was those issues which were on people's minds when we met as a governing council to deliberate this pardon. We had some discussions here, but then we adjourned into the governor's office to make a decision. And everybody sort of looked at each other, as I recall. Nobody wanted to be the first person to speak. Is that fair?
Yeah.
So finally someone, whether it was Ray Burton or whatever, said, well, I think we probably should support a pardon of some sort. And we went around the table, and I don't remember the details of how it came out, but it basically came that the 5 councils, who I think were all Republicans.
There we were. And it was the end of John Sununu's third term.
And Governor John Sununu. And he concurred. And we thought, well, some of you may know Bjorn Lang, who was the public defender and representing Kathy Kaplan. And said, well, we probably should call Bjorn in, but before that, maybe rather than just saying, here's the pardon, we ought to consider if we should put any stipulations on it. And I think the Attorney General said, well, you really can't put much stipulations on it. It's either all or nothing. But we said, well, we can say she gets the pardon, but she's got to serve 3 months or 6 months in a halfway facility or something to give her time to find a job and education or whatever. So we agreed. I can't remember if it was 3 months or 6 months, but anyway, she'd been serving a long time and was, I think her sentence was life without can't remember if it was Lubac. So anyway, we called Bjorn Lang into the office. And if you've ever seen anybody with shock on their face when the governor announced that we've decided to grant her pardon, speechless doesn't come to describe poor Bjorn when found out that he had won the case. I bring this up because I was very proud of the governor and the council for that decision. I thought that the issue, which was not paramount in the public's mind at that time, and the objectivity that my fellow councilors and the governor showed in granting that pardon, really showed the dignity and respect of the council. So,
Thanks, Councilors. My name is Colin Van and I represented District 2 for 2 terms here in Concord. 49 towns going out to Hinsdale on the border of Vermont and Massachusetts, and then over to Durham, Rochester. Probably, hopefully, the most gerrymandered district in New Hampshire history. I know at least 2 councilors here would agree with that. In fact, when I started running, I didn't know for sure what the district would be. It was during that redistricting. And they went through 6 different maps over the course of 6 months. And one of them had Hanover, Keene, and Concord in it. One had Portsmouth in it, which my wife got excited about because she grew up in Portsmouth. She's on a long lobbying campaign to get us to move back. But it ended up with this weird dragon-shaped district. And I thoroughly enjoyed and really tried to make a point of visiting regularly every one of the 49 towns and cities in the district. Very, very different, but very different needs. If you can imagine what, Winchester versus Durham are curious about or need. And I particularly enjoyed the 10-year transportation plan, the Gasset hearings that we held. There's a bridge in Keene now on Route 101 that's a footbridge over the highway there that at the Gasset meeting, the plan for it was about a $4 million plan, and someone showed up from the community and said, we just built a bridge like that for the city on the other end of town for a totally different architectural design for a lot less money, and sure enough, it ended up being built for $2 million less than planned. And that's, I think, the power of an everyday citizen showing up, caring about their community. Every time I drive under the bridge, I get to think about that.
Ted Gatzis, representing District 4. I've only been here for a short 5 months, but interesting the things that I've learned in that short 5 months, that sole source contracting is well and alive. I can tell you that I represent one city and 18 towns and have visited them all, and it's interesting to see what they think of the council, because that's the question that most folks, when you go to the old home days, ask you the question, well, what's the executive council? And it's very difficult to explain to them that, yeah, there's 2 of them, there's one here in New Hampshire, one in Massachusetts, and we kind of oversee what the governor brings in for nominations and contracts that come before us. So it's not an easy task of explaining it, but when you're in Epsom and then travel to Lee, there are certainly different ideas between those 2 communities. And being a past mayor, a lot of the things that I see here at the council are the things that we have taken up when I was in the mayor's office. And, sometimes it's not hard to understand what changes you'd like to make, but how difficult it is to make them. But certainly I look around the room, and this is certainly an august group, that I thank you all for the service that you've put in and the time and the commitment, because it is a time and commitment situation. Thank you.
So I was going to bring a ceremonial stack of paperwork that everyone looks at, but I do it on my iPad, so I don't handle the paperwork. I think Russ has a prompt for us.
Sure do.
Go ahead.
You guys have started a discussion, and the discussion is been based around really the question I'm going to ask. How has the unique institution of the Executive Council contributed to transparency in New Hampshire? And take it from there. It's an open question.
Give my
Councilor
spiel
Collins, or no?
from the national perspective, talking to U.S. attorneys all over the country, explaining what it was. And by the way, I forgot to mention that former Senate President Bill Bartlett once told me that the executive council is the best job in state government. Do you all agree?
Yes.
Best job in state government.
It pays more than $100 a year.
That's it. And so, as Earl mentioned, the governors this morning talked about how, because we have a council, we have clean government, we have no scandals. And so people would ask me, when I went to these conferences, what type of cases do you do? And do you do this and that? And do you have any terrorism cases, drugs, guns, all that? And then how about corruption? Probably a lot of. No, I don't think I did one corruption case in the whole 7.5 years I was U.S. attorney. So then I'd explain why. It's because of this ancient, venerable institution that was set up back at the beginning of the state, where the King of England wanted to have people watching the person he placed in charge as governor, and that carried over after we got our independence and became a state and a nation. And most of the East Coast states, I believe, had councils, and they gradually did away with them. But I remember going to Independence Hall on a trip to Philadelphia for one of the conferences, and everyone was excited to be in the place where the Continental Congress met and see the Liberty Bell and all that. I was most interested in the room, I think it was upstairs, someone can correct me, where the council met for the colony of Pennsylvania and then the state. And it was a room sort of like this, with a table sort of like this, and I wanted to go sit down in my seat, in the fourth seat. It really excited me to be there. And then a few years later, I took a personal trip to Williamsburg, Virginia. Same thing there, when they took you to the Royal Governor's, the Independence Hall equivalent down at Williamsburg, where the legislature met. And they had a similar room. And I remember the tour guide taking us into what he called the governor's chamber, and I said, I'm from New Hampshire, I know what this is, and I explained to him. He got interested in that. So it's a great, I think it's a great institution, and the reason we don't have scandals and such clean government is because, frankly, it's a lot harder to, let me not use the B word, but just say improperly influence one person than it is for 6. And all it takes is, if there's something going wrong, it just takes one person to notice it and to bring it up at this table and say, no, this is not right, we've got to fix it. And for that reason, we've had all these years of terrific, open, transparent, successful, clean government in New Hampshire. So I was just so honored to be part of that, even if it was just for 3 years. And all of you could share that honor.
Yeah, nobody mentioned 1, 2, and 3, and when people would be nominated for position, and they'd come to Ruth Griffin's parlor, and I'd tell them, well, you've got to count to 3, and if you have 3 councils who are going to go with you, you're all set. And I think the same applied if the governor vetoed anything that came before us. We had the power to override the governor. There were several times it happened, Peter can remember, when we did just that. We'd reconsider and vote against the governor and override his veto on some incidents. But the important thing to tell the people and the contractors, if you know you're right, go ahead, but be sure you got 3 votes.
I remember once a governor wanted to get rid of somebody. A certain veterinarian from Concord.
That's right.
And who was chairman of the Fish and Game Commission, and finally got this individual to submit his resignation, and the council rejected the resignation, and he continued his service.
I know somebody who stayed in the same office for 12 years without ever having a vote, because either the governor or the council wouldn't wouldn't move on it, and the guy just stayed there. I understand the law has changed now some, that some of these positions, that they have to leave when their term's up. But back when we were there.
They're very happy. They thought it was still happening.
It would be up to the current council, but a state agency has to go through the Administrative Procedures Act to submit a contract or an item to governor and council. And it then goes into administrative services, I believe, which then puts it on the agenda. On many occasions, governors have withdrawn those items. And I think that there is an issue as to whether or not the governor can withdraw that item because it has gone through the proper procedures. And then the next step is to either be voted up or down, and the governor still has the authority to negate it. But withdrawing it from the agenda is basically negating it out of the public process.
I think the governor wishes he were here now when you were saying that, so that we're not getting ideas, as you suggested.
Well, no matter who the governor is, I mean,
I'm kidding, but...
I heard somebody talking about the 178 items that you have on the agenda. I can remember we had 300 to 400.
Or 500.
And at the end of the year, four big boxes. Ruth sat next to me. I didn't see her for an hour and a half sometimes. I was up that high.
We used to have the state troopers deliver them to us.
Yeah.
And I always asked them to come to my law office instead of my home, because I figured if they come to my law office, it could be a legal related matter. If they come to my home, my neighbors would think I'm under arrest. So it's embarrassing.
Good for you.
I'd like to say something about the fact that we pardoned the lady from Claremont, who paid the guy worked for Kilgus Pontiac in Manchester, and got off, the guy that killed her got off free, and she went to jail for over 10 years.
I'm just going to put in a marker that he was acquitted because maybe he didn't do it.
No, he did it.
Oh, no.
And she admitted he did it, and that's why she went to jail.
Yeah, I helped represent him. Just saying. Billy Brennan and Rich McNamara, Judge Rich McNamara, did the trial work, and since it was a death penalty case, I was in line to defend him on the capital stage, because I'd been doing death penalty work in the South before coming here, and surprised everyone that he was acquitted.
Why did he get acquitted then?
Because the state failed to prove its case, and because Billy Brennan and Rich McNamara are pretty good lawyers.
Anyway, we should point out that it's the council that votes for pardons, not the governor, unlike every other state. And the 3 of the 5 councilors, at least, as Ruth said, 3, have to agree to the pardon. The governor could veto it, and you cannot override the governor's veto, but if the governor goes along with it, then the person gets pardoned. But it's actually the council who makes the initial decision.
Good point.
On whether there's a pardon. And Pete, I think you came back onto council my last term when we pardoned the lady from the Seacoast who had killed her husband.
No, from Nashville, wasn't it?
No, she was from Dover. And it's interesting because there were certain things that the judge in court had not allowed to come into the case. We had the Attorney General investigating different things on this particular case, and we found out information that the court never became aware of because it wasn't allowed in court, that kind of thing. And found out she'd been beaten up, that she'd been in court several times, she'd been in hospital several times because she'd gotten hurt. That evidence never came in to the court to show why she was so frustrated and finally killed him when he was sleeping. And we also pardoned her. Steve Merrill was the governor, and Steve Merrill went along with it just as John Sununu did 9 years earlier. But that's 2 pardons that we did of 2 women who murdered their husbands that we pardoned. And even that one was long enough ago that there wasn't much notoriety about these kinds of cases and the Me Too effort and everything that's going on today. And in fact, I got interviewed by CNN on that particular case. But that's the kind of clout that the council has, but it's the best kept secret in New Hampshire. I spent the whole 10 years explaining to people what the council is, what it does.
Councilor Cahill, you had something you wanted to
Yes,
say.
can you speak to Councilor Walensky's last point? I was going to mention, I'll be very brief, the things that you learned being on the council, the last point you made. One thing was a point that Councilor Burton, I wanted to speak about. Two people that are not here today. Councilor Ray Burton and recently deceased Councilor Louis Georgopoulos from Manchester. And I hope that other people will speak. I really hope other people speak about Louis, people that were here during his tenure, people who knew him well, the things that you learn, and then other things about traditions that start at the council table that are carried on by other councils and traditions that are carried on by the legislature. And Councilor Van Ostern, you made reference to the 10-year highway plan. That started at this table. And if it wasn't for former Governor John Sununu, the 10-year highway plan would never have come to fruition and it would not exist today.
Yeah.
It was our council, and we served on the council with John, former Governor Sununu, John E. Sununu was governor. He brought us into that process. It was almost like we were 5 lieutenant governors, or 5 appendages to his office. We were part of the 10-year highway plan. And we went back to our districts and we took the slings and arrows from everybody in our district about their roads and their bridge projects and their driveways and everything about the 10-year highway plan. And it was tough. But he sent us home to talk about all the roads and highways in our district and come back with suggestions to DOT about our roads and our bridges and our specific highway projects. And that was a very difficult process. But that's the first time the 10-year highway plan got thrown out to the public and thrown out to the press. And that's when the 10-year highway plan became a public document and went back to the legislature. And that really happened. And that happened at the council table for the first time under former Governor Johnson. And it is now something that is public and is the point of discussion in the legislature and the media. And it really started at this table. And I think a number of other councilors who were here during that process, future councilors will remember that. And if it wasn't for former Governor Johnson, that 10-year highway plan would not exist today. And I give him credit for that.
One of the things I've learned about the council is how much it's changed. And that there's kind of a perception that since it's been around since 1679, that if you go back a few hundred years, that there were the same stacks of papers and the same crowd of people. And not only was the 10-year highway plan new in the 1980s, but 100 years ago, the meetings weren't open to the public. It actually wasn't until the 1930s that they started regularly being open to the public. And one of the great elements of the council, one of the traditions, is the breakfasts before the meetings. I learned at a breakfast over at the Employment Security Building that Commissioner Kapatis had a copy of the actual document of when that building was first commissioned in the 1920s and what was passed through the governor and council process at the time. And it was 1 page. And if you think now about what it would take to build a new building, it'd be at least dozens, maybe hundreds of pages. And I think one of the fascinating things is both how this body has evolved to become more public, to become more specific, to have other responsibilities. But I also hope that it keeps evolving, because part of what I would see is at the end of the fiscal year, you'd have those literally 10,000, 20,000 pages of contracts. And realistically, how many of the 5 councilors read how many pages of those 20,000 pages of contracts before the vote happened? I mean, a lot of us were doing triage, where you'd figure out, is something sole source? If so, it needs more scrutiny. Is it a lot of money? It needs more scrutiny. Have I heard from someone in my district? But I found that being able to look at them online, being able to get feedback from people within the district was one of the most helpful tools with trying to evolve that process a little bit. So it's not just 5 people in a room without anyone else looking in, that there really was more transparency.
You know, most of what's in those contracts is boilerplate.
That's
So if you want to keep reading that, you can keep reading it, but it's the same thing, you know, with each one of the contracts. I always found there were only certain pages that I had to look at that told me everything I wanted to know about the contract. I remember the first meeting I was at, Peter, you know, I said, there was something I found wrong with the punctuation. You said, boy, he's looking at this pretty close. He said, you'll get over that. Well, I did get over it, because then I found out really what you need to look at. And those were the important things in the contract, and that's my suggestion to everybody. Look at the things that are really important, not the boilerplate. We would do better, and the state would save money if they didn't even put that paper in there.
It would be nice, it would be nice if all those things are in the same place.
What?
But they're not in the same place in a contract. So then you gotta go through them. So it's, you know, we got 2 boxes
Well, you
this
keep
Friday.
going through them, and I'll keep doing what I did before, which is to read the 4, 5, or 6 pages that are important, and that'll give me everything that I need to know about to make an intelligent vote on a contract.
Councilor Cryan. Oh, Councilor Singular, go ahead.
Thanks. Council said 2 things that struck a nerve, which is appendages of the governor, or government as I took it. And you talked about your constituents calling you up. And I don't know about the other councilors, but I found that talking about what we do, signing contracts, voting on them, that, you know, people kind of, their eyes glazed over. But when they needed help with something, they would always call you up because they didn't know who their state rep was for one reason or another. And in other states, some bills might not see the light of day, but in New Hampshire, every bill gets their day. And that means the state reps are busy doing people's work in the chambers all the time, whereas the councilors seem to have more of a feel for state government. Obviously, the commissioners were motivated to help us out because we were voting on their contracts. So in my experience, people would call me because it all started, somebody, XYZ told me to call you. They said that you could help me out. And I don't think state reps get that as much as executive councilors do. In other states, it is the state reps. Their #1 job is constituency service. But here in New Hampshire, it's kind of flipped. And I saw the role as a councilor as more of that constituent service and the ability for all of us to make the phone call and get something done like that because they knew their contract was, you know, up next in 2 weeks. So they were very motivated to help out. And that's what I'm proud of being a member of the council. And I know that if I have a problem, I would definitely go to the executive council first before anybody else.
Councilor Cryan.
So today I brought my younger son Connor down to listen to the governors and then participate in this. And it was kind of a proud moment as to listen to the governors because many of them talked about the importance of the executive council. Starting with the first one that was asked was John Sununu. And he said, what's your favorite room? He said the council room. He said, I like the transparency that took place within the council room. And then I can't let it go, Bill, without talking about Ray Burton a little bit, because Ray was a wonderful teacher, and when you mentioned constituent service, I was thinking of, I don't know how many times I sat around the Board of Commissioners meeting up in Grafton County, and I'd say, what are you up to now, Ray? We get out at noon or so. He said, well, I gotta run up to Colebrook, there's a problem with the hospital, and then I gotta run down to North Conway, they got a water issue, and then I gotta go to Laconia, because they're really concerned about their airport. Oh, I gotta get back to Bath in time, because I got a church supper. And that was a typical day. Ray was out there a lot. In fact, as I was running and then got elected, I would be asked what is one of my major jobs, and I said constituent service. And so I set a goal to go to all of the 109 towns in 4 cities by June 1st. I made it with 2 weeks to spare. And you find, especially I think as you move further north, people feel forgotten. And what I've tried to remind people is one of the greatest things you can do is find something you're interested in, let the governor's office or your executive counselor know, and serve on a board or a commission, because it's a great life experience. You know, some of these people have served for 20 years on a board, they don't get paid anything, but they get invaluable reward in the service in their state. And but I always say, pick something you're interested in, because the worst thing you do is volunteer for a board on aging and not want to serve and help older people. So find something you're really interested in.
You know, that's why Ray had 5 cars, you know, he was driving all over the state. When people used to talk to him, you say, well, how big is your council? I said, well, I have 10 towns in Manchester. And I said, looks like Rhode Island. And when you look at Burton, it looks like Texas. You know, you got the rest of the state.
I was going to finish on one thing.
Oh,
So, no.
Go ahead.
But on the one thing I was going to finish on is, one day we went to the hospital to visit someone. And we came out, he said, you made a mistake in there. I said, I did. What did I do? He said, you took your coat off. He said, you take your coat off, people think you're going to stay a while.
Yeah.
you know, you're going to see a lot more pardons probably. That's the one thing that comes across this table, is that the pardon hearings are going to be coming here. And Pam Smart, that's been going on for how many years? Been in jail now, what, 20 years?
29.
Or more. And I can remember when we get the request periodically, and I know there's one coming to the council now, I believe. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I can remember one of them, her mother called me from California, and I don't know what she was hoping to accomplish, but I told her, I said, well, the request is going to be on the agenda. So she flew in from California, and she came here. So when that item came up on the agenda, she jumps up from her seat, and she was ready to participate. I said, wait, whoa, whoa, whoa. This is not a public hearing, it's a public meeting. You can sit there, but you gotta be quiet over there. And you can listen to what we're talking about around the table. Now, you're gonna have that again. That'll be coming again.
Think it over, King.
We did,
What?
It already came.
It came already?
You turned it down, right?
yes.
You turned it down? Well, let it come again.
Councilor Cahill.
One last thing on Council Burton, and I hope you guys from Manchester will have at least one thing to say about Louis, the late, great Louis Dudrop before. One of the best things I ever learned at this table was Ray. It was right after my first council meeting. And he buttonholed me. And I didn't know Councilor Burton from hole in the wall, but being from the Seacoast, I didn't know what that was. He pulled me over and he said, I just want to give you some advice. And I said, okay, thank you. He says, before you get your chest too puffed up and your nose too far in the air, and he did too far up in the air, he says, okay. And he literally followed me around the table and he says, you are not an elected official. Now, I had served in the legislature for a while. I've been in the House for 7 or 8 years. Like, Ruth had been a state senator for a while. That's how I got to know Ruth, by the way. She was a state senator when I was in the House. And he literally followed me. He said, you are not an elected official. And then he said to me, official is an adjective. It is not a noun. And I said, what the hell is he talking about? He actually said that to me. Official is an adjective. It is not a noun. And he looked me right in the eye and he said that to me. He said, don't get all puffed up about yourself. He said, official is an adjective. It is not a noun. He said, you are not an elected, you are a public servant. That's the last thing he said to me that day. I walked out of here. I remember driving home to Northampton. I said, that knocked me down a few notches. And I always think about that, watching the news at night.
Did you recover?
Yeah, but I think about that a lot. And I watch the news at night. I said, obviously our current president has never met Ray Burton. Anyway.
Anyone else?
But I learned that at this table. He literally chased me around this table. Let me tell you something. I don't know how many other people he told that to. He was pretty adamant about it.
I might tell it to somebody, who knows?
Yeah. Official.
Councilor
You
Smalley.
say the theme of our meeting here is transparency in government, and I think Councilor Cahill touched on it with the 10-year highway plan, which basically used to be generated from within the state agency.
Right.
And now it's far more of a public process where the people and the elected officials know what that plan is. And I think that part of your goal should be to make sure that other agencies in state government that the public knows what they're doing. Some of the major agencies, well, one of them would be in Public Works, which I think is done out of Administrative Services now, isn't it? The public should probably have a role in knowing and involvement in the Public Works expansion projects for state government. And there are others that, within different agencies, that the public should, or the council should strive to make sure that the public knows as much as it can what is happening. There really can't be secrets in government. And I'm not saying secrets in that it's some sort of nefarious plot by state agencies, but just the normal course of doing business is not always an open public process. And you're dealing with public funds and public officials, and people have a right to know what they're doing.
Well, I appreciate the robust discussion. I'm going to turn it back over to Councilor Valinsky.
So as I'm listening to the discussion, which in some ways is fairly serious, I'm wondering on a lighter note, what was the most fun thing that happened while you were on the council? What was the most amusing? I didn't really expect it, but having the fourth graders come in
Oh, well, absolutely.
was wonderful, even though some of them are taller than me now. And I love, and I'm sorry he's not here, I loved when Joe Kenny would ask questions of the fourth graders, and they would always outsmart him with their answers. So are there a couple light moments?
I have a light moment.
Yeah, go ahead, and then we'll go to Peter.
Well,
Go ahead,
the
Councilor.
Manchester Union leader referred to the council as, you can correct me, Peter, blue-haired country club liberal Republicans. So I showed up at the council chamber with my golf club and a blue wig to disprove what the Manchester Union was mad as hornets because I had made such folly of the statement about the women.
So that trick's taken now.
You remember that meeting?
Yes, I do, and I want to tell another story that involves you. We had a meeting downstairs with then Governor-elect Craig Benson, and he informed the council that things were going to be different. He was not going to do proclamations of, high school week or higher education month or all these things. He was not going to do certificates honoring different citizens. I can't remember all the details of it, but the things were going to be done differently. And Councilor Griffin said, Governor-elect Benson, you were going to do proclamations. You were going to do honorariums or honor citizens of this state for whatever any of the councilors want. And that's the way it's going to be done. There is no new way of doing things. And Craig Benson said, well, Councilor Griffin, I guess that puts it into a new light.
Thank you.
And you were his counselor. Yeah.
Yes.
I thought the funniest moment with the fourth graders that in the short time I've been here is when Governor Sununu came back and sat down at the end of the table and said, in my time of doing this is the first time I heard this, fourth grader shook my hand and he said, my mother said I can shake your hand, but I can't talk to strangers.
Well, I don't know if it's a light moment, but my favorite council meeting was in the Gold Room at the Mount Washington. And it was about 36 hours before Ray passed. And I know Mike Cryans was there, I remember you were there, not on the council obviously, but, and we had just dedicated that meeting to him, and it was a very brief meeting, it was mainly ceremonial. But it was neat to see how much pride he had, and there were still people, you know, tugging on his coat, asking him for a favor, and him promising that he'd get it done for them. And that it really was just a day or two before he passed away. But it was a special meeting. There was a lot of history in that day.
Others?
One time we had a group from the town of Chester, and I said to one of the boys, I said, who was the most important person that you have learned about in Chester? Well, he said, he came from Exeter, but he said he was so taken with the town of Exeter that he took up his middle name of Chester. And I said, well, tell the other councilors who you're talking about. He said, I'm talking about David Chester,
French.
David, yes, thank you, Michael. David Chester French from Exeter. Nobody here knows who it is.
Was he a counselor?
No.
You gonna tell
But
us?
that kid knew. No, I'm not going to tell you. Go
Was he
ahead. Well,
Do I have to take out my iPad?
Have you ever seen the statue in Washington D.C. of Abraham Lincoln sitting down?
Is he the sculptor? He's the sculptor of the Lincoln statue.
And that fourth grader knew that.
Yes, he did.
That's amazing.
And now so do we.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Those kids knew it, but most of the councilors weren't all that familiar.
Including me.
You didn't know? No. You look it up. It's very interesting to find out this man from Exeter, what he has contributed under the state of New Hampshire, but for the United States of America.
So there have been a couple of mentions of Councilor Georgopoulos, who just passed. Does anyone want to say something, particularly
I would only say he was a very good friend of mine. I happened to follow him. And in fact, I'll tell you an interesting little story. I followed him on the aldermanic board in Manchester as the alderman from Ward 1, and then on the council when he decided to run for Congress against Bob Smith, an incumbent congressman, and unfortunately lost. I went to his funeral a couple of weeks ago, and Frida, his lovely wife, said, "Don't follow him." I said, well, we haven't figured out a way to get out of it. Only one person. But I would say Peter served with Louis, and Bill, you served with Louis. And Ruth and I got to sit with all of them during the transition from when we got elected to when we took office in January. And in fact, I'd make a comment that it's Councilor Griffin who got him to stop smoking in this council chamber, and that's when I quit. I said, if I can't smoke here, I'm not going to smoke anymore. And after 30-some odd years, smoking.
Yeah, could be.
And poor Don Tibbetts, who covered everything for the union leader, was a heavy smoker. In fact, I probably killed him. And he had to go out in the hallways and smoke after our council took over. John Sununu thought it was a good idea to stop, and that's where the trend started.
Wow.
But Louis was a great counselor. He was great with constituent service. I tried to follow in his footsteps and do the same thing, but he ran that men's shop in Manchester, and the politicians came in there, and the public came in there, and Louis waved his pipe around and talked to him about how he could take care of this or take care of that, and he'd do 4 things at the same time. I've even heard Democrats talk about how good he was at it, and how they'd vote for him every time. But you know more better than I do how he goes around the council table. But he was a good counselor.
Louis was, well, Bernie Streeter and Louis Georgopoulos arranged for us to have a notorious joint fundraiser which was roundly criticized by the union leader and a few other people. But it was financially rather successful. When we met, split up the funds, so to speak. Louis
You're on tape, you know.
was the treasurer. And he said, well, here's what each of you are going to get from this. He says, I've withdrawn, I forgot how many, $100 or $1,000 it was, for 3 suits for the governor.
I think we're just going to leave that one.
Well, in his later years, of course, Louis DeJopolis lived in Portsmouth and Rye.
Right.
So he would jingle my telephone if something came up that he didn't approve of. He'd say, you better do something about it, Griffin. But I used to hear from him all the time.
You know, a lot of politicians did go into his store. And the governor was regular, you know, to go in and get a fitting. Bob Allard went in there one time and he bought a hat. So Louis sitting there checking all the different hats. He finally gets the hat, puts it in the bag. Bob doesn't even look. Then all of a sudden he takes his slip out. He says to him, Jesus, Louis. He said, what? He said, Bob, you haven't bought a hat in a while. You know, but that was Louis, no matter what.
You
He was
never
a
bought
good salesman.
anything from Louis. You never went in there and bought a thing.
No, you came out with 2 suits or 1.5. Yeah.
He was something at this table with former Governor Sununu. It was something to watch.
Oh.
I have one more thing about the clothes. The name of the store is Jim's Oxford Shop. His father owned it before Louis did. Inauguration day, the day our council was sworn in, there was this nice reception in this room. My mom and dad, my late father and my late mother came. They'd never met Louis DeJopolis before. My father was a pretty good dresser. He was sartorially very conscious. He wore nice suits. And right here in this room, my mom and dad came in, and I didn't know Louis that well, but my father came in, he was wearing a very nice gray suit. And Louis came right over to him. And he said he had a habit of grabbing people's coats like this. You know, going like just like this. He'd never met my father before. I think it was right here in front of this window. My father had a very nice gray suit on, and I introduced him to my mom and dad. And my father walked over to him, shook hands, and I introduced him to Councilor DeJopolis from Manchester. And the first thing Louis did to my dad was he grabbed his suit coat like this and looked right at the label. He looked at it.
Our chef never marks.
No, he looked right at it. He says, he called my father Jim. Jesus, Jim. He goes just like this. He said, Brooks Brothers. He said, God. He said, that's not so bad. He said, Brooks Brothers. He said, now I'm going to serve with your son on the council. He said, you got to come in my shop. He said, I'll take good care of you. First thing he ever said to my father, come in my shop. He said, I'll take good care of you. He says, you like pinstripe? My father says, I like pinstripe. I have some pinstripe too. He says, come on down to the store. He says, I'll take good care of you. He has pinstripe. So, first thing he ever said to my father, I remember my father's leaving the chambers. My father looked at me, kind of blinked like this, and said, what the hell was that?
So,
That's exactly what happened. He did that to my father. I never forget it. Jesus.
so we have a bicentennial seal over by the window that everyone should be sure to sign before you leave. I think it's probably appropriate for us to mention some people who haven't been mentioned, who couldn't be here with us today. One of my predecessors before Colin was John Shea. Bev Hollingworth couldn't be here. Dudley couldn't be here. They're all well, they just have conflicts.
That Hollingworth was the council.
Bernie Streeter.
Bernie Streeter's been mentioned a couple of times. Lou D'Alessandro is doing Senate duties, and of course, current Governor Sununu was on the council with Colin. Deb Pignett, Congressman Pappas, and current colleague of ours, Deb Pignatelli, couldn't be here today. Am I missing anyone from?
Wheeler.
Oh, David Wheeler, and I mentioned Joe Kenny earlier. Oh, Councilor Gregg, one term. Yeah, he never made much of himself. I'm sorry.
Whenever Governor Gregg would talk about anything going on in the state of New Hampshire, he always mentioned the Executive Council. He made it and you know, it was a common thing, the governor would say, well, the House and the Senate, Governor, having served here, said give respect where it's due. He always mentioned the Executive Council.
So, any others that I've missed? I think Russell will entertain a motion.
Yes, and a motion to adjourn.
Wait, go
I
ahead,
just want to
Dan.
thank both of you for inviting all of us here. It's great. It's like old home day, so thank you. I want to actually also comment on the staff, which has been great to all of us here.
Agreed.
They're the ones that help us get out the word and the messages, especially after our meetings, so I want to thank the staff.
Joanne and Megan.
One other thing that maybe ought to be mentioned is the fact that I know with inflation it's gone up, but the budget near the end of my term back in the mid-90s for this whole council, expenses, salaries, everything, was less than $100,000. That's 5 people, staff, part-time mostly, one or 2 people, and all the expenses, telephone, car, whatever we got, the whole thing was less than $100,000 for our budget. Just think about that.
It's a little less than that now.
In real dollars, it's about $250,000 now. So I don't know how much of that is inflation and how much you guys are spending, but. Great.
I don't want to mention the cookies and the coffee over to the side. They're there for the public too, when we break. Okay, you can entertain that motion.
And we'll take a vote.
Yeah.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Thank you.
Adjourned. Thank you all very, very much.